Hey guys, Wyatt Claypool here. Ever since the Canadian federal election happened, there has been a lot of hot takes from people on what they think caused the Conservative Party to not beat the Liberals. And I want to break some of these down for you guys today because I find them so full of dumb misinformation that I will then hear people repeat in the coming years as to why the CPC HQ didn't win. Do you know why they didn't win? They didn't take hard enough stances on certain issues. I found that they didn't let their own candidates speak on the local level enough. They didn't let them attend enough events or attend to local debates. If they did that and they had a truly grassroots campaign in all 343 ridings across Canada, I think we would have actually probably won. I think there was too much top down control, the same way there was in 2021, in 2019, and 2015. That is the last piece of the puzzle that certain people in headquarters just refuse to actually place on the board, which is letting your people do what they want to do. Obviously, don't let someone go rogue and start saying that they're going to do things that aren't in the platform, but you got to let your own people do what's right for them in their local riding because every riding is very different, even ridings right next to each other. The style of campaigning and the way the candidate has to comport themselves is extremely different if you want to win. But I want to get to some of the bad takes because, again, people are going to take the wrong ideas away from these if they take them seriously. So, first up on the list to respond to is PPC leader Maxime Bernier, who thinks he's taking good shots at the Conservatives here when he's really just taking shots into his own foot. Bernier here says, so in this election, the PPC lost roughly 700,000 out of its 840,000 votes from 2021. I suspect the vast majority voted for the Conservatives, having succumbed to the don't split the vote, we must beat the libs this time hysteria. Good job, Maxime, basically calling your own people stupid if they decide to vote Conservative. And yet, that strategy failed. We still have another Liberal government, and Polyev couldn't even win his own seat. I know that would be for stupid HQ reasons that they didn't win his own seat. Goodness, they shouldn't have had him running there if they knew that there was a lot more Liberal areas in the riding and he didn't have enough time to campaign himself. But I digress and we'll move on. He says, but the insane CPC trolls and the fake independent journalists and influencers paid by the CPC are still accusing the PPC of helping to elect Carney. They refuse to recognize that Polyev dropped the ball, that it's not our fault if he failed to beat the party that destroyed Canada for a decade. It's not our fault he offered a weak platform that was indistinguishable from Carney's. Okay, that's where no, it was not indistinguishable from Carney's. In fact, it was very different from Carney's. I think in certain areas like crime, they could have gone harder. On taxes, don't just propose reducing income taxes by 15% below $50,000. Reduce everyone's income taxes in every bracket by that much. Reduce corporations' taxes by that much. Really rip the doors off the thing and demonstrate that this isn't just going to be better than the Liberals. This is going to be completely different than the Liberals. I think that would have been a smart thing to do. So, in that small aspect, Bernier is right, but he pretends as if the platforms were indistinguishable, which is wrong. By the way, the thing that annoys me about this, and I actually don't blame the PPC for the Liberals winning any seats. I know in Brampton, there were several seats where the PPC made up the Conservatives' margin. That happened because there was people who were kicked out of Conservative Party nominations who then said, screw this, I'm going to run for the PPC just to show them. That was not some random PPC guy who delusionally thought he was going to win and ended up tripping up the Conservative candidate. That was usually like a Hindu Canadian who was arbitrarily kicked out of a nomination saying, well, screw this, I'm going to run myself. And if the PPC didn't exist, they would have run as an independent. And by the way, that's kind of their prerogative. If you mistreat a guy and you threw him out of a nomination for not a good reason, he could come and bite you by running himself in that same area against your guy. But regardless, though, I don't agree that the PPC screwed up the Liberals. But is Bernier really not going to do any self reflection onto why his party completely collapsed? Onto how he didn't even get an entire third of the country with a candidate? He had two-thirds of the country that had a PPC candidate, and then the other third, they just didn't do it. They just didn't even have candidates in an entire third of the country. After operating this party for years, they still cannot figure out how to get a candidate on every ballot. It's sad and pathetic. And even then, Polyev was getting criticized for not doing American podcasts. Oh, Patrick Bet David invited it on. You know, that sterling receptacle of knowledge. Patrick Bet David has asked Polyev to come onto his podcast. Oh, why won't he do Alex Jones's podcast? Why won't he do Joe Rogan? Because it's a Canadian election where a lot of voters are motivated against the US. They are motivated to stick it to Donald Trump. And you think going on extremely pro Donald Trump podcasts is going to be good for Polyev, especially if he flew down to do it. I think that Polyev could have done more podcasts. And that, again, goes back to fundamentally probably people in HQ saying, no, don't do a podcast. It's going to be risky, which I completely disagree with. But Bernier did all those podcasts. How did Bernier lose so many votes if going on those podcasts was going to make him popular? If it was going to bring him to new eyes? He was on Tucker Carlson's podcast. How didn't he gain votes? It's almost like doing American podcasts doesn't matter. Or else they wouldn't have fallen on their faces nearly as hard, unless Bernier is going to claim they would have had 0 votes unless he did that. Oh, my goodness. But yeah, I find this all stupid and hypocritical. But now let's get to the next take I want to talk about today. And that is another PPC sort of adjacent take. It's from, actually, no. Let's start off with the thing that this person is reacting to, because this is a stupid mainstream media liberal take on why the Conservatives lost. So here on CTV News, we have this article that says party needs to be not so extreme. Time for soul searching. What Conservatives are saying about Polyev defeat. Now let's be very clear. When they ask people what did they do wrong, they are cherry picking people. They are trying to find people that they can use as basically their wedge against real conservatism in the Conservative Party. They want to argue that no, you should have ran a red Tory who doesn't want to, like, only wants to cut taxes 1%, doesn't really want to cut any spending. He's going to maintain every social program of the Liberals, and he's not going to touch social issues. He's not going to touch foreign policy. He's just going to do whatever the Liberals are doing. Not so extreme. What is actually extreme about the current Conservative Party of Canada? Anyone saying that they were extreme is frankly just telling on themselves. But I digress. Now I want to move on to the real take that I found obnoxious. And it's from Viva Fry, a man who has not lived in Canada for a few years now, but is constantly telling Canadians how they should be doing politics. He says, would you look at that? Pierre bent himself over backwards into a devastating loss, trying to be not so extreme for Canadian media, and it still wasn't enough. I wouldn't, he was not bending over backwards to be not so extreme. It's like he didn't even read the headline. That's what the media is saying he has to do. He was not extreme, and he also was not trying to be not so extreme. He was frankly doing a pretty good job of just being himself. I think, again, certain policy areas, the HQ kind of bound him and didn't let him do or say, or basically pressured him into doing something else, and it didn't work out. But the idea that the Conservatives just needed to be more right is stupid. There's nothing more right that I'm suggesting about increasing criminal sentencing even more or by cutting taxes even more. That's not even more right. It's just extending on the idea that the Conservatives have already latched onto. But he says, when you let your adversaries dictate your strategy, you will always lose. Any less extreme Conservatives will be more liberal than the Liberals, and Canadian media will be happy. If the Conservatives were a little less extreme, they would not be exactly like the Liberals. And I've been seeing Viva posting about this constantly. Oh, well, Polyev ignoring podcasts didn't help him. Well, he should do more podcasts next time. Bernier did the podcast. It didn't help. All these people who think that, oh, if you're going to run for Canadian politics, you should run like it's the Donald Trump campaign. Guys, you can like Donald Trump, obviously. There's a lot of things I don't mind about Donald Trump at all. But running in a Canadian election is not like running for election in the United States. Imagine if you were running for president, but Florida didn't exist, Louisiana didn't exist, Alabama, South Carolina, Georgia, North Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky. Imagine if all those states didn't exist. Now you're running for president. Are you going to run a little differently now that the states that you need to win in order to win the Electoral College include Connecticut, includes Rhode Island? You got to snag or either Colorado, or you need to be able to win New York. It's going to be a little bit different. Before, there was a big wave of conservatism in the United States. In fact, the parties actually tended to be more moderate. in the sense that not like they're like soft, because in fact you could say the Republicans are softer than like Nixon's people back in the 70s on certain issues, but they were like less ideologically conservative. It wasn't a small government wasn't considered the highest value of the Republican Party at the time. It would have been a little bit more of a hodgepodge of issues that were more regional and stuff like that. More pro union, less pro union. That would have been kind of like American politics in the 70s. But back in the day, the Republicans needed New York because it used to be that the South was Democrat. And so, what are you going to do if those states didn't exist? You're basically in Canada now. The South does not exist. You do not get a big, giant, and Texas also doesn't exist. You do not get a big, giant download of votes out of that region. And now that's what Canada looks like. You have Alberta and Saskatchewan, which are very conservative. But once you get to Ontario, you got to win Ontario. Winning Ontario is like winning New York State. It's possible, and that doesn't mean you got to be moderate. In fact, you can actually go really hard on certain issues and you can win more. Every single voter is passionate about something. I've said this many times. There's no such thing as a moderate voter. A moderate voter doesn't vote. Someone who doesn't have any really strong opinions on anything doesn't vote. The people who vote care about certain things. That's why conservatives did so well with Asian Canadians, because Asian Canadians really care about drugs and crime policy. And the conservatives did a pretty good job on those issues. And if they went even a little bit harder, we probably would have gotten the second Richmond riding in British Columbia. If we said there's no 3-strike rule, there's a 1-strike rule. If you're caught dealing fentanyl, 2 years in prison, that's it. Because you're basically giving out a deadly weapon to people. So if they did that, they would have done well. If they pushed a little bit harder on certain social issues, they could have done better. Maybe roll out a parental bill of rights. That would be good. You could do a lot of stuff like this. Again, an across-the-board tax cut, where that gets a lot of people's attention who are in higher brackets when they hear that you're just going to cut 15% for the first $50,000. That person's like, yeah, I pay $1 million in taxes every year. That doesn't mean much to me. So regardless, they could have easily done that. But this is just such a dumb take to me that, no, the conservatives need to be more right. Depends on what you're talking about. But the idea that they just need to be more strident is foolish to me. And then I liked this take by J.J. McCullough responding to another take. This is the last one of the day. He says, "This is the most delusional idea I've ever heard. If the Conservatives' reaction to this election loss is to quadruple down on trying to make Quebec like them, then the party is truly doomed beyond salvation." And he's responding to this text saying, "The Conservatives could offset their loss of PPC support. However, if they increase their seat count in Quebec, where they only gained 1 seat while the Liberals scored 10. But this would only happen under a leader who appealed to Quebec voters, who would be more moderate in tone. As we saw in this election, Poilievre was not that leader. But there is now talk that he may seek a seat in Quebec City, in a possible attempt to transform himself into someone Quebecers could like." So obviously that didn't happen. He's going to be running for Battle River Crowfoot. I agree with JJ. It's a stupid idea. Do not try and appeal more to Quebec, because in appealing more to Quebec, you'll actually push Quebec away. Do you know what Quebecers care about that the Conservatives could run on? Lowering immigration significantly. If you did that, you would maybe pick up a couple more Quebec seats. And by the way, I never liked this whole strategy where you need to win the 905. You need to win the Montreal area. You need to win all of Atlantic Canada. No, you don't. You just need a smattering of seats everywhere. You could win another 10 seats in Ontario. You could win another 2 seats in Quebec. You could win another 5 seats in Atlantic Canada, another seat or 2 in BC, and maybe win the Yukon. And you have a majority if you're the Conservatives. Conservatives right now are like 143 seats. Again, the math works out. You win another 10, 12 seats in Ontario, win 1 or 2 more seats in Quebec, just run really hard on immigration. In Atlantic Canada, run on a more socially conservative platform. Again, they actually did a good job in Newfoundland, running in favor of the seal hunt and expanding fishing quotas. Good ideas. And in Nova Scotia, I think really what happened there is you just had a bigger retiree population that didn't have specific issues like fishing to appeal to, and then those people voted basically against Trump. And also the premier of Nova Scotia, Tim Houston, was not being helpful at all, and in fact was acting as if he didn't care if the Conservatives won or lost. He was almost like Doug Ford for Nova Scotia, was just knifing the Conservatives the entire time. But if the Conservatives come back in the next election, they can probably grab the last seat in Saskatchewan they need. They can probably grab another seat in Alberta. They can probably grab another 2 seats in BC pretty easily, maybe 3. In Ontario, probably another 10. In Quebec, now they're 2. In Atlantic Canada, there are 5. And I think we already have a majority just counting it up that way. It's not that difficult. But everyone who's always saying, oh, well, we need a 905 strategy. No, we don't. We just need a strategy to win certain types of voters. Because guess what? Voters exist everywhere. Voters who care about crime exist everywhere. Voters who care about drugs, taxes, who care about parental rights, who care about like everything, like crime, foreign policy, everything. You can find it everywhere. Target a specific type of voter. As soon as you're trying to target like a regional type of voter, well, Quebec voters want us to be moderate. Not all of them, and we don't need all of them to win seats. So what are we doing here? This is what makes me so annoyed about strategy. People who are political strategists in this world are delusional, and they constantly convince themselves that voters want to hear less from them. They want to hear weaker policies, and then they'll vote for you. Because if you triangulate every single type of voter into one person, you get a voter that doesn't even exist, a voter who just has no particular opinions on anything. They just want you to sound nice and happy. O'Toole tried that. He got wiped out. Here, Polyev, there was probably flaws in the campaigns. He could probably position himself a little bit different, but it wasn't because, oh, they were too extreme. No, in fact, they could have probably talked more about specific issues because voters have a very small bandwidth to be able to hear what you're saying. You got to really talk about crime if you want if voters here care about that to hear you. You got to really talk about taxes if you want people to hear you. And if they did that more, they probably would have captured more of those types of voters. But anyways, so that's it for me today in this video. Kind of a mini rant, kind of a ramble. I just want to talk about all these like stupid takes. Oh, Polyev should be more extreme. Oh, Polyev was too extreme. No, that's just not how politics works. There's no, oh, he should be more moderate. What voter at the door says, oh, I wish he was more moderate? They usually say specific things. So, oh, that's it for me today, guys. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, do all that great stuff. Maybe you leave a comment on what you think the Conservative Party HQ should be doing in the next election. And that should be it for me. See you guys later.